Hello, I'm April Jones, and we at Jones Law Firm care about you, your family, and your well-being. That's why we've put together this informative webinar series to answer your questions about life, about the law, about your family. So thank you for joining us, and let's get started.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Aaron. Good afternoon, participants. Hi, I'm April Jones. I'm Jones Law Firm PC. I've been an attorney 29 years. We've been Jones Law Firm PC for 20 years in Colorado, and we are here to talk about COVID-19 and parenting time. We have a special guest, our own Aaron Young and David Collins, the senior attorneys at Jones Law Firm PC. Aaron, go ahead and introduce yourself and then pass the mic to David, and then we'll get started.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erin Young. I obviously work with April here, and I hope that we can answer any of your questions today.
Okay, tell them a little bit about you, Erin.
I have been an attorney for just about 16 years, actually, so 15 years. A lot of that time was doing civil litigation, but I've been doing family law exclusively for the last 5 years, and I've more recently joined April. But have a strong history in domestic violence, in any criminal aspects with your family law case, grandparents' rights, in general, all parenting time and divorce issues.
And she's amazing. Thank you. David?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is David Collins. I'm an attorney at April's office. I have been in practice for 15 years as well here in Colorado. My background began as a criminal prosecutor, then moved on to criminal defense, have some immigration defense background, and I've been doing family law for some years now. And like Aaron, I do all aspects of family law, including dissolution of marriage, allocation of parental responsibilities, child support, adoption, dependency, neglect, and other issues affecting children and families.
Thank you, David. So we are here because David and Aaron and I put together the COVID parenting guide. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about what our objective was for that?
Yeah, our objective with the parenting guide is to provide a resource to our clients with regard to the emerging issues around the coronavirus and the issues it's creating for parenting time. There's been a lot of confusion around some simple things as whether exchanges of parenting time still occur under the current orders of the governor. And then there's been more minute questions that we'll get into today around the nuances. For example, if one parent gets coronavirus and one does not, or one child is a high-risk candidate for coronavirus. And so we're hoping to be able to help answer some of those questions today.
Absolutely. So I was looking at a CNN article, interestingly enough, and it's titled, Navigating Child Custody in the Time of Coronavirus, which is exactly what we've been putting together. In the article, they have a 14-year-old daughter. A couple has a 14-year-old daughter. She spent 4 days a week at her mother's house in San Francisco, 3 days a week at her dad's house in Marin County. It was about a 30-minute car ride. Amid the COVID-19 panic, the custody arrangements just became a problem. Father's girlfriend was dating a clinician who works the front lines at an area hospital. So this is one of the situations where neither parent is exposed, but they're in relationship with somebody who's exposed. And that is one of the items that we touch on in our guide, because this is real world stuff. Doesn't matter what state you're in. People are still having these problems because COVID-19 is national. So what they decide to do here, the girl's father is dating a clinician who works the front lines at an area hospital, and neither parent was comfortable with the possibility of increased exposure. So they talked and they agreed to a modification. What do you think they came up with, Aaron?
Well, I'm hoping what they came up with was an arrangement that the child would stay with the parent that was not in a relationship with a worker on the front lines. And hopefully then that parent also offered makeup time to the person who was dating a frontline worker for when hopefully this thing kind of resolves or flattens out.
Which is what we suggest in our guide. Mm-hmm. Actually, interestingly enough, which is why I thought this article is interesting, is the teenager has been living full-time with her mother ever since, because they agreed that until the public health threat diminishes, she would stay with her mother because they wanted to minimize the potential risk for her getting exposed. That is what we would call a personal decision. Those two parents talked and they decided to do what was best for their family, which is what we are really urging everyone to do. Think about what's best for you, because that didn't make, that's not what I thought would have happened. That's not what Aaron thought would have happened. But this father wanted to have that arrangement, right? So it's, no judgment. We are trying to keep people safe. So let's take a look at some of these calls so we can get right on this. And the first question I have here, my girlfriend works as a nurse in a hospital, and my ex is withholding my 3-year-old son because she thinks he will get sick at my house. She will not negotiate with me when I try to reassure her that we are taking extra precautions. What should I do if she is not willing to work with me or let me see him? Very similar to what we read about in San Francisco. Aaron?
Yeah, my first question would be whether there are any existing orders. So if there's any existing orders, all of the stay-at-home orders very specifically state that you need to essentially comply with court orders. So if there's an existing parenting plan, that needs to continue. That is considered essential travel and absolutely should be complied with. If there are not existing orders, the answer is still the same. It's just that the court hasn't ruled on it yet. If there are no orders, and if the ex will not cooperate, then there's a couple options. I mean, one would be that I guess now I'm going to kind of contradict myself. I'm going to assume that there are orders, in which case they can file an emergency motion to enforce parenting time, which I think a court would address immediately. They've given us that clue in different motions that we've had to file, that they're addressing these things. They don't have any patience with people not following through. They consider consistency in parenting time to be essential right now. Absolutely. Kids are going through a lot, and to maintain the sense of normalcy that they've always had is extremely important. So the parent that is dating the nurse, they need to take the extra precautions that we've advised, but otherwise they absolutely should be allowed to exercise parenting time.
And David, do you have our booklet? Can you direct our attendees to what page that would be, with either one of you, so we can have you read along? And if you have questions, turn to that section in the guide. And if you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll answer your questions right on the spot about it.
And so that would be, the best fit for this question would be under page 7, where when one parent is exposed to COVID-19. In the scenario we're talking about with this question, I think everyone's assuming it's a nurse. She's exposed to coronavirus in her place of work. And so the question is, what do you do when you think one parent faces exposure?
Okay. And again, if you have any questions about that in our guide, we can talk about it right now. I have a question here. My ex is now remarried and his new wife has kids of her own living at their house. I want to keep my 2 children at a distance during this stay-at-home order. Can I just keep them with me? No. Aaron was just talking about following the current court orders. Assuming you have court orders. If you have court orders, you have to follow them. And the current shelter-in-place orders that we have in Colorado specifically state that court orders are to be followed. So you cannot just keep them with you. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yes, we are getting a lot of inquiries from people in this position whose children are transitioning between what are now mixed households with an ex-spouse who now has a new husband or new wife and and the children have stepbrothers or stepchildren. And so in general, that's correct. You're supposed to follow your current court order. However, if you have concerns about exposure of your child to the virus in the other home, because someone in that home has it, or they have a high exposure job, then you may be in a position to ask the court to restrict parenting time until the exposure risk has been decreased. One example of this that we've seen in our office is someone who works in a job where they fly on a very regular basis and still fly on a very regular basis. Courts are at least accepting motions to restrict in these circumstances to determine whether the exposure to the person who flies all the time is something that's too risky for the children to be exposed to.
Now, we do have language, and if one of you could take a look at, direct our group to turn to the page that addresses that. Aaron, I believe you put together some detailed language where you consulted with people who were on the front lines in the medical field and got some very specific ways that people can protect themselves. And that's what we would present to the court. So if somebody wanted to file a motion to restrict, to say, hey, he's at the hospital, or hey, he flies and I don't think my child should be around them, you can combat that if you can show that you are taking steps to protect yourself. And that is what we have spelled out in our guide. What page, Erin, and can you elaborate?
Yes, it's on page 7 of the guide. And, and I put in there that it could apply to healthcare workers, grocery store workers, package delivery workers. It really could apply to anybody, though, that just is simply in a higher risk of exposure field. But some things that I was suggested by some friends of mine that they're actually implementing in their own homes is that they're removing their clothing either prior to.
Erin, when you say friends of yours, what field are they in? Just for
these particular friends are all in the healthcare field. So some of them are physician's assistants in a primary care physician's office. Some of them are nurses. Some of them are one of them is married to an anesthesiologist. All people that are coming into contact potentially with the virus. So, as I was saying, they are removing their clothing either prior to or upon entering their home. And I know that that's kind of a funny thing to say, but, if there's modesty issues, you can leave a towel right at the entry and you take them all off and you leave your shoes outside. And then you immediately take your clothes. You either start the washing machine or you at least put them in there. And then you yourself get in the shower and you rinse it all off. And then, of course, just some other kind of things not necessarily related to that, but you should avoid sharing utensils with your children. As hard as it is, especially with the little ones, we should avoid the really close contact, the kissing, the snuggling. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, when you have little kids. But really just trying to avoid the really close contact and even trying to maintain that 6-foot distance at home.
And what's interesting about this is if you are a healthcare worker, if you're one of our heroes on the front line, people aren't taking your children from you. So to have the flip and say, oh, I don't want my kid to go to the other parent's house because they're on the front line, you got to think about that when you're presenting it to the court. So the precautions that you need to take are the same precautions that you would take if you lived in a happy household with 2 frontline healthcare workers. Now, if you are having problems, though, then that's when you call us. That's when we talk about it. That's when we say, but they're not removing their clothing, but they're not washing their hands, but they're not taking these steps to protect our child. Or if your child has a compromising medical condition, then that's a completely different issue. And that's a section that we have in here as well. So these are not cut and dry or set in stone. You've got to use your own good judgment with respect to the facts of your case. Here's a question from one of our attendees. My daughter has really bad asthma, and I know her father does not take the precautions to keep her safe from this virus. When she was over there for the weekend, she said he took her to the grocery store, took her to the park, even though he really wasn't supposed to. How can I keep her with me during this virus? I've tried to talk to him, but he laughs because he doesn't think the situation is as serious as it is being made out to be. What do we do here, guys? We get this kind of question these days a lot, and I want to see what kind of answers we can give people. But this question, to me, it would be, you'd have to look at whether or not it rises to the level of something we could present to the court. and get the court to take action on. Because we have, I mean, Aaron just filed something the other day and got a response, what, a day later, 2 days later?
The very next morning. I filed it at 10 at night, and I had a response by 10 in the morning.
So even with the courts not letting people come into the court for ordinary business, the courts are still working. They're still issuing orders. Your cases are still moving forward. So this is an example, and that is why we have this guide, because what we want to do at our firm is look at your issue, and if it's something that's emergent, we want to take it to the court, or we want to take it to the other party and try to work it out first. Like in this particular case, if she has really bad asthma and it's a problem and the virus is a problem for asthma and he is not being cautious, I mean, maybe we would talk to the pediatrician. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I agree. So we are getting a lot of calls on this. There are a lot of children in Colorado with asthma. This is COVID-19 is a lung issue disease. The primary symptoms when you really get it are pneumonia and a fever. And so you certainly don't want a child with asthma to get pneumonia. For the person asking this question, if you were going to file a motion to restrict dad, you'd want to have a couple things prepared so that they be filed either by you or by your attorney with your motion, including some kind of documentation that your child has asthma, you know, some existing medical records, pictures of their inhaler or their prescription are helpful, an affidavit outlaying the examples you gave that April just read, that dad on his parenting time is exposing the child in high-risk environments, and the grocery store is a high-risk environment. It's all over the news how terrified employees of grocery stores are to be at them, and how anybody who's at risk should not be in a grocery store.
Now, what about getting a letter from the doctor? If this is that significant, the pediatrician should be ready, willing, and able to write something, right? Would that help us?
I think absolutely. Anything from a doctor indicating that the child should not be exposed in any way that isn't necessary to the coronavirus would help. Absolutely. And especially because it'd be a newer document with a current date on it. And that would be helpful. But we are getting a lot of inquiries where one parent is not taking the medical issues of the child seriously. And it's a big deal because as we've learned in the United States, 50% of all cases are under the age of 50. So it's not an old person's disease in the United States.
And the interesting, it actually isn't even interesting. People marry their opposites. So the carefree person marries the conservative person. So you do need to factor that in. The personalities that you brought into the pandemic are still your personalities. So make sure when we're bringing these allegations that you've taken into consideration that you guys are different. And let's make sure that we've got some real solid facts that we can go to the court with. We go to the court, the instant we need to. We would just want to make sure you flesh that out. Now, I am wanting to remind you or let you know that you can ask questions. Push the bottom button of the Zoom screen, click it, and type your question. So if you have more questions, click the bottom button on your Zoom screen. So just wanted to make sure you knew that if you weren't familiar with it. Next question. My kids stay with their dad primarily during the week. He is a UPS driver, and they are essential during this time. If my kids get the virus and they stay with him, are they supposed to just stay quarantined at his house? Which one of you want to take that? In terms of our proposed language that we believe the court would sign off on because it makes good sense.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that first, and then Aaron, you can add anything. If the child is diagnosed with coronavirus at a parent's house, the doctors are going to recommend the child stay at that house until no one in that house has symptoms. And so what you'd want to negotiate with the party that has the child is make up parenting time later when symptoms have gone. And I have a case right now, and I won't add a lot of detail for privacy, but I have a client whose child caught the coronavirus, was at the end of the virus, then the second child caught the virus. And so the whole household is on quarantine. The other side, the mother of the children, has agreed to let the children stay there and not file anything with the court and make up parenting time at a later date. And so it's really essential that even parties that don't traditionally compromise find a way to compromise now for the kids and for your own health. Fighting to bring a child who has the virus back into your home doesn't help anybody. it certainly won't help you. It's a very contagious virus. And if you bring someone who has it into your home, you're setting yourself up to catch it as well.
We've even seen scenarios where the immunocompromised parent, we have a dad who still wants the child back in his home, even though he has a pretty significant condition. So that was it just goes both ways. You love your parent, your child, but you need to protect yourself. Any comments on that?
No, I think that dad is perfectly within his rights. If he is willing to accept the risk, then he's well within his rights to do so, I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the same as the dad who has the girlfriend and he wants to not see his child until the pandemic is over so he can be with the girlfriend who's exposed to the hospital. We've got a dad who's got a health condition and he wants to be with his child and just try to take extra steps to protect both of them. So that's just within people's rights as long as they're operating in the best interest of their children. Do you guys agree?
100%.
Okay, let's see. I was looking at your guide that I received. I think it will be helpful, but what do you do if your ex is not willing to work with you to come to an agreement? I'm having trouble explaining to her that the kid should not be traveling out of state with her right now. You're probably referring to the section in our guide where we talk about out-of-state travel when it is limited or restricted by law. You should have make-up parenting time. And it sounds like this particular person still wants the kids to travel to him. Erin, why don't you take it?
Well, and yeah, there's a lot of kind of additional questions I'd love to know related to this situation, but yeah, I mean, I would say in general, the general rule here is to kind of avoid additional risks and unnecessary risks. And in that case, travel certainly would fall within that category. And I don't know if we're talking out of state travel. I'm assuming we are, rather than in-state travel.
Out of state travel.
Okay. Then yeah. And so I would say that if it's related to parenting exchanges, then hopefully they can work together and reach an agreement regarding make-up parenting time.
Right. But here it says they can't. I think you need to call us. We need to look at, shelter in place is not, how do we manage that? We'd file something with the court just like you did 2 days ago, Erin, and we'd be able to say, we're finding that if you give the court a sound answer so that the court isn't having to make it up as it goes along every single scenario, the court can very easily and very quickly weigh in on that and say, yes, that does make sense for the child to stay here. This is a pandemic, and we can make sure dad gets make-up parenting time. So if you're listening carefully, you'll see that we kind of hit the same conclusion for a good portion of these facts, even though we get a lot of different fact patterns, and it's dogs, it's cats, it's kids, it's emergency room workers, it's lazy spouses, it's grocery workers. The common response is doing what's best for the child, and if someone's not going to do that, then we go and we take it to the court, but we take it with documentation and we take it with strong facts, and we give an alternative, give the court a choice, and give the court a way to get make-up parenting time for the other person. So that seems to be a key component, is that you're not just trying to keep the child forever in an unfair way, but you're trying to do what's best for their health, and at the same time, make sure the other parent gets parenting time, because that's still in the child's best interest if it was originally.
Yeah, just to add to that, if you're the parent that has the kids and you're going to keep them, or in the other side's agreed, you can make sure to set up FaceTime or some other way for the kids to communicate with their parents on a daily basis, so that the kids, they need to have contact with both parents. So make sure you make that available.
Right.
And actually,
go ahead, Erin.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to kind of piggyback on David there, the court has suggested in this one case of mine that if video conferencing is what people elect to do, or FaceTime, whichever, that it be for a relatively long period of time, and maybe a couple hours, and then you kind of just live your life during the call, and maybe you're baking, maybe you're eating lunch together, even though you're across the screen, but you're still kind of doing the regular activities of daily life, just over the phone.
Yeah, which makes sense, is what we're all doing right now. We're trying to do daily lives over the television. Hi, team. So same kind of out of the box thinking for your children.
Yeah.
Jones from PC. I feel so robbed by this virus. My visitation has come to a screeching halt. I'm trying to stay strong, being a home care provider and not having the appropriate PPE. But at the same time, I'm desperate to see my children. I don't want them at risk. I'm vulnerable and I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I did everything the court asked me to do in every way. I'm a rock star, but this virus came right when I was moved to community visitation. I do not know what to do. David.
Well, you're in a tough position. I can tell you that we have clients who were in community visitation at licensed supervised facilities or with an unlicensed supervised person that the parties agreed to.
David, can you elaborate on that a little bit for our participants who aren't familiar with?
Sure. In some cases, a court can order that a parent be limited to supervised visitation either by an agreed upon third party like an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or at a licensed facility where you have someone trained to supervise visits, will supervise the visits. Usually those are once or twice a week for a few hours at a time, where a parent reestablishes that they're a safe parent and then can move on from supervised visits back into parenting time. We always have several clients who are in this position, and right now several of the visitation centers are closed down for good reason. But a lot of visitation centers have moved to online visitation, video-based visitation, so a parent can at least sustain some contact with their child. You know, it can be difficult to keep a child's attention on a call or a video, but at least they get some contact. We've heard some feedback like if each person has a deck of Uno cards, you can play Uno over digital video. Anything you have two sets of, really, you can play that game with your child and then sustain a longer call or longer communication that way. April's right, you both can bake the same cake at the same time in two different kitchens and have that experience. So unfortunately, I don't see courts lifting restricted parenting time during the coronavirus, but I do think facilities and parents should be flexible to allow communication to occur via video.
If I can add to that as well, I do think that if there is an alternative, I mean, everybody's kind of got their own separate issues, but if there is another way to have a different supervisor and still maintain the safety of the child, if you can present any option to the court, they might be willing to consider it. For instance, if there's a different supervisor, you know, if substance abuse is an allegation, if you have access to a breathalyzer, there are different options depending on the circumstances that would allow you to present something to the court that they might be willing to consider.
And that's really what we value. We value listening to the client and seeing what their issue is. Like Erin was saying, if it's alcohol, can we have you take a breathalyzer at the beginning and at the end, and have your sister who's a nurse or a therapist do the supervision? Like, what can we present to the court that would give the court enough of a belief that there are safeguards in place so that it allows you to have parenting time, because the court believes parenting time is very important as well. So how can we be creative? How can we look at the facts? Because we have to look at them differently now, because these are unique times, and come up with things like baking a cake at the same time and telling the court how this is valuable, where at another point in time that wouldn't be. So don't give up. Let's just be thoughtful and be strategic about how to get you where you need to be while we're in this time. So I have a question. To keep our son home and offer makeup time, does the medical decision-making kick in here? I know I would be risking being oh, this was a long question that got cut up. Okay, this person has sole allocation of parental responsibility, sole decision-making. The ex has parenting time on Sundays from 10 a.m. to 6 and a Wednesday evening visit. This person has proven domestic violence. They had a PRE. That's how she ended up with 100% decision-making. He's canceled parenting time for the last 9 visits, the last 3 due to being sick. She reached out to him to talk about COVID-19, to let him know that they've been self-quarantining for 2 weeks, and he dismissed it, and now it's all of a sudden insisting on seeing their son. Took him to McDonald's, Sonic, and Walmart with an exclamation point. This mom has a lung condition, so obviously she's concerned about getting COVID-19. She got a letter from her doctor, so she keeps her son home and offers makeup parenting time. How would that work? She's wondering about the fact that she has medical decision-making. Does that make a difference? She knows she'd be risking contempt of court, but this is how strongly I feel about this. Okay, so let's just try to dissect this. We have a dad. He has in Sunday parenting time and a Wednesday dinner visit, and he has flaunted the safety concerns expressed by the public health administrating folks and the medical community, and has taken the child McDonald's, Sonic, and Walmart, which, I mean, is that really flaunting? It isn't for him, but it is for her because she has a lung condition. What do we do here, guys?
Well, my first response would be that, unfortunately, I don't think sole decision-making regarding medical applies to her own medical. It would really apply to decisions related to the child in terms of his treatment, that kind of thing. So I don't think that would kick in here. I would say that, I mean, I guess it kind of depends. Is he taking him through the drive-through at Sonic, or is he going in and letting the kid play at the play place at McDonald's, which I think at this point is probably closed. But, you know, there's kind of some, know that it would necessarily rise to the level of a reason to file a motion to restrict. But I am open to opinions from David and April on that.
Well, you know, I think a lot of it depends. What is he doing at Walmart and Sonic and McDonald's? Is he maintaining 6 feet away? Are they washing their hands? Are they washing their hands for 20 seconds? Like, are they maintaining proper distances and precautions, or are they not? Like, how far is he going to disregard her and the warnings? So those are my thoughts. I think we need more information. David.
Yeah, I mean, one observation I have is you really don't see children at the store at all right now, anywhere. So I don't think people who are caring about kids are taking them anywhere, especially stores and restaurants. And I know you can't go in a restaurant, but you can pick up food. The question is, you know, what remedy would he have? And that's, you know, so it's not clear what he would file that would immediately get him the kids back now either.
Right.
So that's I think again, that's a complex case. We probably want to sort through it a little more. But it just sounds like, anyway, it's unfortunate, but it sounds like father's being unreasonable. Really, everyone needs to put the children first before themselves, and it just doesn't sound like that's happening in this particular case.
And I think if we were to sit down with you and dig into the case, I mean, why does dad only have 1 day a week anyway? Like, what is his backstory that the court is already familiar with and has already expressed potentially some amount of concern? And will that make a difference in what you eventually present to the case to the court if you were to just keep your child right now? So just more to look into at this point.
Yeah, the other mystery that we just don't have the answer to is how long does all this last? So you may have the best of intentions keeping the kids, and that sounds reasonable for 2 weeks, but if 3 months go by, you know, where are we at then?
Right. So I would even look at setting up some sort of letter communication chain where you said, hey, let's put these precautions in place. Let's talk about what we're going to do and see, you know, what that looks like if he's insisting on disregarding everything, and if he'll do it in writing or not. So a lot to unpack and check out there. If my kid's dad is staying with someone that has flu-like symptoms and my kid's dad is not taking proper precaution, what do I do? I've already asked the court to restrict parenting time and I was denied. I don't know what to do. I fear for my girl's health and safety. Well, I can't tell from the question, did you file to restrict the parenting time in the last 2 weeks since the coronavirus has been in effect, or is this something that you've done previously? And in terms of the flu-like symptoms, Is it the cough and the fever also? So I think you would want to get more details. David, what do you think?
Well, I agree with your analysis on the front end. We're getting this question a lot, and I'll change the hypo slightly. We have people calling us where they say, not only does mom have to go to work because she's in a required job, so her job hasn't been shut down. The schools are closed, which means she has to put the kids in care because she goes to work 8 hours a day. And so rather than having a sick roommate, the kids are being watched by a sick caregiver. And so that's raising concerns as well. Who can you put the kids with when you go to work? And are the people you're putting them with safe? In my hypo, the person that's watching the kids happens to work at a fast food restaurant when they're not working the kids. So they're also in a high exposure environment. With your particular scenario, I think April's right. We need to know what happened with your motion to restrict and when it was filed and how the judge decided to rule on it. But I think these are all, again, can be strong bases to limit or restrict parenting time if the parent that wants the kids has an environment in their home that creates a high probability of exposure.
My ex-husband and I share 4 boys. We have 50-50 orders. Our 9-year-old has a chronic lung disease and is immunocompromised. He's been with me for 5 days, for my 5 days. We exchanged children yesterday. However, I kept the 9-year-old with me because my ex has a wife, 2 stepchildren, and 2 parents living with him. The stepchildren go back and forth to their father's home. I currently only have 2 people in my home. Because of his medical history, COVID-19 could kill my son. I feel it's better to keep him in one home versus the back and forth with exposure to more people. It sounds like the people that your son is being exposed to don't have any symptoms. They haven't been exposed to someone with COVID-19. It's just that there's a lot of people going a lot of places. What do you guys think?
Well, what I would say is that this is a situation that's probably a little hard to control, because even though your 9-year-old hasn't gone over to the other parent's home, the other children will be, so they in theory could bring it back. So it's not necessarily a situation you can 100% protect against. And it sounds like the other parent didn't necessarily dispute you wanting to keep the 9-year-old home. So that's great, as long as you guys are on the same page there. But I will say, I don't think there's a way to 100% protect in this scenario.
Well, here's one. If you let your other 3 boys stay with their father and you kept your 1 boy with a lung condition with you, protected. Now,
and I have that in one of my cases right now where the sibling groups.
I'm sorry.
So I have that exact thing in one of my scenarios right now. I talked about earlier, I have a client whose child has coronavirus. The other child doesn't. And so the child that doesn't is staying with mom, and the child that does is staying with dad. And they've agreed that the siblings are going to stay split until the households don't have coronavirus.
So tough decisions to be made to protect everyone. And if you want to call us and talk about it, we can talk about it and see what some of the other options are, because that is a hard thing. But it might be a necessary thing if your son's at a significant risk and you can't keep keep them safe otherwise. Oh, I think I have some follow-up. I offered to let him keep the other boys. Oh, so she did offer to let him keep the other boys. Sounds like he didn't want to keep the other boys. What do you guys think of going to court and filing to force him to keep the other boys? I think the court might entertain that. That's a little different than what we normally do. But these are different times.
So you'd be asking to restrict the children into the dad's care rather than in mom's care. That's a novel argument.
Right.
It is a novel argument.
And but these are novel times. I think there's something to that. If you have 4 children, one's compromised, one isn't, and you have 2 parents who can provide separately house care, I think you present that to the court. You need to determine what statute that's under. I And that's part of what we're talking about. If you can present something to the court that makes sense, so they can say, aha, this is a concern, this is something I can address, I do need to protect these children, then we can get some quick turnaround. And then we have a follow-up here. Yes, I filed this week, and yes, they have a fever and a cough. Okay, so this is the participant who had filed the motion to restrict. She said that children did have a fever, or the other folks had a fever and a cough, and the restriction was not granted. I would say give us a call and let's see if there's something that you missed or that the court's looking for. I mean, sometimes things are not granted for reasons beyond substance, the substantive facts of the case. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always worth a second look. That seems pretty compelling. You know, it's county to county and judge to judge. So, you know, there's no guarantee how each individual judge is going to respond. Okay.
And an additional follow-up on the little boy who has the lung condition and the 3 brothers. Mom says we've always been divided. We've always divided and conquered because he was born with a life-threatening birth defect. For example, if someone is sick, one parent keeps a compromised child and one keeps the other. He's refusing to do that now. So that's their status quo. I think you can go to court with that.
Yeah, actually, because I agree, April. So, and what April's referring to is if you and the other party have a practice that's been a practice as your parents throughout the children's lives, a court can and often will make you follow that. And your practice is to separate the children to protect them, or to keep the child away from a sick parent, it sounds like, too.
Do I need to file the COVID agreement my ex and I come up with the courts? Yes and no. If you want to just reach this agreement between the two of you and you don't want it to have you don't need it to have the effect of a court order because you guys are just doing this by agreement, then you don't. But if you do want it to have the effect of a court order, then yeah, go ahead and file it. Unless your current court orders say that you can make changes by written agreement, in which case read your current orders and follow that language if you can make written changes yourself. Otherwise, I kind of feel like if you're asking the question, you should go ahead and file it with the court, ask the court to make it a stipulation. When is a good time to call? I'm the one that filed to restrict. Oh, okay. Our office is open. We're working remotely. You can give a call now, 303-799-8155. That's 303-799-8155, Jones Law Firm. So go ahead, give a call now. We're denverdivorceattorneys.com, and someone can take your call. Okay, so yeah, please reach out. And we are coming up on the end of our time. I hate to leave questions unanswered. If I don't get to your questions, we will make a point of getting back to you directly. My ex does not make my child do his online schoolwork. What should I do about this? I've been hearing that a lot.
That is a tough one. And I will say right now, I don't know the age of your child, but I don't know that it will be the court's primary concern at the moment. I think the court's primary concern is going to be the safety of all involved and the continuation of parenting time. I mean, I guess it's something that, you know, if he absolutely refuses, then it's something to investigate further. But at first blush, I don't think it's something that the court will necessarily consider an emergency.
An interesting point our expert brought up, if you were attending our webinar, I think on Monday, we had a school principal, and he pointed out to a similar question, that if your children are like K through 8, their school year is basically done in terms of grades and testing and scores. But if they're 9th and above, they are still going to need to take tests and be responsible for completing courses to get the grades they need to move to the next level. So if your child is an older child and they're not being made to do work, we may have some teeth there, because this could be have a significant impact on them in the future if they're doing nothing and they're essentially losing a year or half a year of credits. Like, that would not be okay with the court. Any thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. But yeah, I think, and that's kind of why I couched it with, I don't know the age of the children.
Right.
I do think if it's a smaller child, an elementary age kid, even from what April said, a middle school kid, it doesn't sound like it's going to be the court's priority right now. However, she's right. If they're losing a year of school or a semester of school such that they would actually have to repeat, I mean, that's a big impact on a kid's social emotional development. And so I would think that the court may at least entertain it.
So we are need to wrap up here. These questions are complicated and nothing is too much or too little for us to discuss. So if you still have questions, just call us, okay? We can make an appointment, we can get something scheduled. You can tell, we talk about this all the time. So we can follow up with you and just kind of see, if there's something there, if we need to file something, if we need to write a letter, if we need to just kind of breathe until we get through the pandemic. So we're here, Jones Law Firm, DenverDivorceAttorneys.com. And thank you so much for your attention. Tomorrow we have a Zoom webinar on the Zoom room on how to put your best foot forward in this virtual world. So Terry Rubin and Kurt McDonald of Pro Communicators will be here speaking with you, giving you tips and advice. They're fantastic. And then on Monday, we have some real estate folks coming to talk to you about some interesting ways if you need to sell some real estate or refinance. We have a flat fee realtor coming. We have someone who's works with one of the We Buy Ugly Houses companies, and we have a lender. So that's on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we are calling it Take Control Tuesday, Winning in the Face of Adversity. And we are having NFL legends Rod Smith, and he's a Super Bowl champ, 2-time Super Bowl champ. And we have the Houston Texans former general manager, Rick Smith. So he's coming. So you can imagine he's been managing 100 men at a time. And so they have some great advice on how to get through this, get through tough times, and come out winners on the other side. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, David.
Thank you for joining us for this webinar. If you or someone you know would benefit from watching a recording of this webinar or any of our other webinars, they can be found at DenverDivorceAttorneys.com. Thank you, and keep a lookout for future live webinars, and I hope to see you again.